Hello and welcome back to As an Aggregator, a channel designed around connecting consumers to content one title and thumbnail at a time. If you feel sandboxed by your YouTube algorithm, this is how you escape your filter bubble. Remember, the value that you receive is the content we curate because we provide a hyper edge. Okay, so let's jump into the content for today. Diary of a Content Curator. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about my journey and experience as a content curator. Number one, from consumer to curator. How did you transition from being a dedicated content consumer to becoming a content curator? What were the key experiences, challenges, and aha moments along that path? How has this transition shaped your understanding of both consuming and curating content? Okay, interesting. Okay, so how did my transition from being a dedicated content consumer to becoming a content curator? How did I transition? So I transitioned from, I think the era was just before 2020, so right around the end of 2019, maybe even into 2018. During this era was a unique era. I think we were only about 2 years out of the one of the most recent adpocalypses. So as a result of the adpocalypse, we're using that term it's a supply side term in relation to content creators. But as a consumer, the way that affected us was that it changed and it shifted the landscape of available content. Now, not only did you have content consumers constricted by what they thought they could post and what they actually could post, but you also had people's libraries getting expunged and shifted and changed. During that era, you had an esoteric culture commentary creator known as Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot having their videos like supremely restricted. But that's a story for a questionable quick pick for another day. How did I transition from being a dedicated content consumer to being a content curator? Well, for me as a content consumer, there was no better tool within the YouTube user interface for me than the subscription box. For as long as I've been a content consumer on YouTube, I've used the subscription box to cultivate the content that I wish to consume so that I wouldn't have to be reliant on the algorithm or the home screen or any other hyper edge that was non-existent during those eras. So as I added more content creators and channels to my subscription box, eventually we accrued so much content in terms of the subscriptions, but also in terms of the variety of content that we consume, that velocity rate in terms of how much content creators were publishing became far more for me to manage than I could. What does that mean? That means if I was scrolling through my subscription box for a day, for a 24-hour period, it might take 20 to 30 swipes, just swiping. Wait to refresh, swiping. Wait to refresh, swiping. So if I'm doing that for a 24-hour period, you cannot imagine what it's like to make an attempt to go back 7 days into the past, or 2 weeks into the past, or maybe even a month, if that's even possible, on desktop. So when I realized that this was a problem in its first initial stages as a conscious problem, I said, okay, well, how do I deal with this? Is there a way to manage this? And the mode in which I found to manage this was content curation. Now, at that point in my life, I didn't have a view of it as content curation. For me, it was just, okay, well, how do I manage the content that I consume? So for me, I ended up learning how to manage the content that I consume by using playlists. So that was kind of my first foot in the door in terms of becoming a content curator, by utilizing playlists to manage my consume digest in the sea of endless content. So that was that was an example of a key experience and maybe a challenge. Okay, well, what about a challenge or an aha moment? Well, I guess that was kind of the history 2017, 2018, 2019, trying to stay ahead of the fear of missing out in terms of, okay, well, what would happen if I lost access to that stratigraphy? See, for me, the identity of being a content consumer comes first. So what that means or what that represents is me using content consumption as a way to enrich my life, as a way to chase my dreams, as a way to discover unseen aspects of reality that I otherwise wouldn't have had access to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's such a meaningful and enriching journey for me to be able to take that on, to be able to take this on as a mode of being a part of a cybernetic ecology, but really just as a content consumer. I mean, maybe 100 years ago, 50 years ago, I would have deployed a similar approach in relation to a library system. But it just so happens that based on the advent of the internet and information theory, we're afforded the opportunity to work through a massive hypergraph in relation to the content contained on YouTube. So for me, that was one of my supreme aha moments. That one of those moments where I was just like, hey, I don't want to miss out on the content that will slip through my cracks in my consume digest if I haven't been able to scroll through my subscriptions. So how do I manage that? And the technique that I deployed was to say, okay, well, maybe we need to create an ASAP playlist. Maybe we need to create a category specific playlist. Maybe we need to create a temporal playlist where we add videos from a specific time period as a reflection of our subscription box that we can go back to in the past. That was the thought process behind my journey from a content consumer to a content curator, saying and thinking, well, hey, this has really helped me as a content consumer. It's helped me so much that I think that these tools, techniques, tips, tricks, and tactics could be beneficial for others, other consumers, and other content curators that might seek to package their cross-section of a YouTube hypergraph in terms of content that's relevant to them, a cross-section of meaningful, useful, and enticing content that's beneficial for them, to package that not just for themselves as a content consumer, but to package it for others, and to bring it full circle and to say, well, can it be monetized? What value is it really? Not just for yourself, but for other people. So how has this transition shaped your understanding of both consuming and curating content? This transition has shaped my understanding because it's one thing to be a content consumer. For that, you just sit back and you consume, you listen, you hear, and you figure out consciously or unconsciously, well, how does this content relate to all the content that I've consumed in my past? And where is it leading me in terms of where I would like to move in the future? So for one thing, over my journey as a content consumer, we come across a lot of different important content as it regards my consume digest. And that's reflected in what I describe as my category specific quick picks. So what that means for me is culture commentary is this aspect where it's the flattest aspect of pretty much everything going on within the creator ecosystem, from your most technical grade culture commentary, which might be viewed as a lecture series or some form of audiobook, a real aspect of content that you have to process and think through. That's technical grade culture commentary, all the way to the bottom up content that YouTube was built off of. I'm talking a person in their home, in their pajamas, in their backyard, speaking their truth from their vehicle, using public transportation. It could be anything. A person walking on the ground outside on their way to work, on their way to their personal lifestyle preferences. Someone communicating their truth, right? YouTube, that being the core bedrock to culture commentary. And truly, it's why I have made it a point to deploy this term in terms of culture commentary, because I think if it can be deployed in a wider context, it would help match content consumers and creators speaking about what they feel is most relevant to the society in a specific present moment. I guess back to the transition. We're talking about culture commentary now, but the point was specifically, well, that was an interesting point. So if you want to hear me go into that a little bit more depth, leave a comment or a question, a point of consideration in the comment section. But specifically back to what has shaped my understanding of both consuming and curating content, it was from our natural science quick pick. One of the main pillars in our natural science consume digest is this idea of a fractal brain theory, but also is based on my personal history, using Wolfram Alpha, Wolfram physics. So now we're talking about hypergraphs, and I always appreciated this concept of a hypergraph. Makes me think, okay, what is a hypergraph? Okay, making content on explaining a hypergraph, curating content about hypergraphs. But in between the thought of internalizing what the concept is and then explaining it is saying, okay, well, to what extent is this concept made manifest in the world? To what extent is this concept present in our everyday lives? So to that extent, I said, hey, okay, if we're dealing with this emerging concept in terms of information theory, where we're talking about traditional graph theory and how people thought of edges and nodes as specific instances, and then we're saying, okay, so what does that make a content consumer? Okay, hey, I am a content consume. No. Right now, in this moment, if you're listening to this podcast, then you are a content consumer, and I am a content curator. So what does that mean for me specifically? That means that the content itself would act as a node. And how you arrived at being able to consume it, that would be a cross-section of an edge. What brings you to an access point where you're reaching any given piece of content or any fixed focal point as a point of reference? So in this case, I am a hypergraph node as a reflection of the content that I'm creating as a creator, a content creator. And how you arrived here, whether it was the YouTube algorithm, whether it was a link sent to you by a friend, whether it was a reference on a social media platform, that reference, that causal basis heuristic that led you to arrive at this specific piece of content, that's what we're referring to as an edge. And it's one thing to think about that as a relative absolute. Okay, we have hypergraph nodes. Okay, is that content? Is that a specific video? And then you have hypergraph edges. So what is that, a link? Are we talking about a video and a link, a piece of content and a reference point? Okay. Now the interesting part is the development of graph theory to include hypergraphs. So now instead of it just being a focal point as represented as a specific linear, okay, you have a node. Name the node, describe the node, and then that's the node, and then you have an edge. Name the edge, describe the edge, contextualize the edge, and shape the nuanced contours of how that edge is relevant. And then you take it a step further, and then you say, okay, well, in the wake of hypergraph theory, or in the development of graph theory, where we're including the existence of hypergraphs in all or varied contexts, in terms of content, now an edge can also be a vector or a node, and simultaneously a node can also be a vector or an edge. So that really stuck with me as a content consumer. I was sitting here like, okay, so I had to develop technique in order to be a more informed content consumer because of the actions of how YouTube changes its algorithms, how YouTube changes its cybernetic ecology in terms of the user interface. And that led me to develop specific insights in terms of, okay, well, hey, wait, am I just an outlier in terms of content consumption, or do people truly not see the value of playlists? But also, what is a playlist and why is it valuable? Like is a playlist a node? Is a playlist a vector? Is a playlist an edge? Is it a link? Is it a bundle? And so thinking about that and contemplating it made me say, okay, well, wait, well, if graph theory is a relevant if the development and the differentiation and the evolution of graph theory in terms of using concepts like a hypergraph, if that is relevant, valuable, and useful, then to what extent can we see this made manifest? To what extent can a playlist not just be this specific cross-section, but also something more? To what extent can a video not just be a node or a vector? To what extent can a video also be an edge? And more importantly, how can you use that to communicate the idea of the theory behind hypergraphs in terms of tracking and tracing its development within culture as a whole? So I found that to be really interesting. Really interesting. I said, hey, wait. So I'm a content consumer and we're using playlists, but back in 2018, 2019, people didn't really use playlists like that. They're like, if we're looking at the landscape, I mean, right now we're talking about the development. We're talking about Diary of a Curator. So it's one thing to say, oh, hey, yeah, did you know that there are content curators out here? Right? Because that's an emerging element of the creator economy as a whole. But it's also implied by natural science technique in terms of making a connection between hypergraph theory and the creator economy. So what does that mean for me? That means, hey, we have content consumers and content creators. Content creators and content consumers. But what about the hyper edge? If a vector is not just a vector, if a vector is also an edge, a hyper edge, and if an edge is not just a hyper edge, if an edge, a link, a piece of connective tissue is not just that as a medium of linkage, to connect nodes, then what does that mean? What does that imply about the state or the nature of our current content consumption landscape, or the creator economy, the creator ecosystem? For me, it implied even the existence of untapped market share in terms of our creator economy. For me, my journey and experience as a content curator started with saying, hey, well, what does it imply about the state of where we're at in terms of the development of the internet and internet culture and the economy of the creator ecosystem, the creator landscape, where content consumers, they love content. We thrive off of content. But what does that even mean? Well, technically, a title and a thumbnail can be content in and of itself. And packaging that and curating that and structuring that and organizing that in a meaningful way can provide value to content consumers, even if the consumer never even clicks into a video. Does that make sense? Because the video isn't just a blanket empty title and thumbnail, which it could be. It very well could be in terms of the evolution of curation meta. But as it stands now, if you're curating titles and thumbnails of value in terms of what it takes to put in the work to create a meaningful thumbnail and title, then usually that's backed up by a content creator that's deploying content in context. So again, food for thought. So that brings us to the end of this section. To be frank, I thought I would get to all of this, speaking to consumers about marketing the content we consume. Number 3, speaking to creators on enhancing their narrative journey. Number 4, speaking to content marketers on monetizing content curation. Number 5, future trends and practical advice. So, wow, this was a nice little podcast entry. I guess in future entries, I'll pick this back up and describe some of our other experiences in terms of diary of a content curator. But I do want to take this time to pause and reflect, see if I can add any final thoughts. Give me about 45 seconds to gather my thoughts. So, to pick back up, how has this transition shaped my understanding of both consuming and curating content? For me, this has shaped my experience because it changed the intent basis behind my experience as a content consumer. Previously, when I was solely acting as a consumer, I had different priorities, different preferences, different modes that related to why I was consuming content and in what context. As a part of this transition, it's not just about consuming content for myself anymore. While that's still the primary focal point as a consumer, because I have to relate to the content and it has to be meaningful content. I have to know why I'm curating the content. That means not just putting in random things or things that I think might be valuable for others or things that get clicks and things that get views or even just the most niched aspects of my own content consumption journey. I have to weigh those constraints and those concerns to be able to find meaningful crossovers and attributions for a population at large, for potential content consumers out there from different age groups to different preferences, all types of things that I would have never had to have had factored in as a generalized content consumer. So for me, this journey has shaped me because now I can see it from both the supply side and the demand side. I can see supply side content consumption as a content marketing operation. And I hope to be able to find a valuable enough voice to be able to shape the perspectives of demand side content consumption. What content do people find valuable enough to curate? And what of my consume digest do people find valuable? Those insights will give me a great starting point to be able to chart my journey as a content curator. In such a newly emerging field, people don't know what to expect, really. Why are you even here? What's your purpose? What's your point? For me, I start that by saying I am and will always be a content consumer, first and foremost. That's a part of my identity. That's a part of my lifestyle. But it means something different when we're extending that as an olive branch, when we're extending that as a bridge to others and saying, hey, this is something useful and meaningful to me as a person and as a curator. And then really trying to close that gap. And more importantly, as a creator, hey, let's talk about it. What about this content? Hey, is it valuable content? It might not be. Let's talk about it. And to really explore those discussions and to provide space for a hypergraph node, for a content node that includes the concept of hypergraph saturation. Because for so long as a consumer, we can go out there and find videos under 1,000 views with very, very little comments. And it took being a creator with a larger presence in order to be able to engage others in discussion, to accrue attention around concepts that they create for. But what about outside of any given video, any given vector? What if it's just about the edge to pre-existing content? Do you need to comment on the content to make it relevant, to make it useful, to make the attention necessary to engage others in discussion? Or can you just simply provide an edge, a link, a hypergraph reference? That's going to be a part of our journey. So, if you have found this content, I repeat, if you have found this content and are looking for what to do next, you can find our playlist creation taxonomy. Also, if you have found this content and are looking for what to do next, establish conscious competence over the content you consume today by adding videos you watch into a playlist right now. Right now. I repeat, if you have found this content and are looking for what to do next, establish conscious competence over the content you consume today by adding videos you watch into a playlist right now.